Now, J.K. Rowling has spoken out about her first husband, claiming that he held the unpublished manuscript for her first Harry Potter book hostage to try and stop her from leaving him. And what she did was sort of sneak a little page out each day and photocopy it at her place of work to be able to get it out of the premises. But I mean, this is sort of maybe a classic example of coercive control, Sophie. You've got sort of a bit of experience of that, haven't you?
Yeah, and I actually recently made a documentary about this and how domestic abuse impacts disabled women differently and how we label domestic abuse. And so I think this story is, firstly, it's brave of her to share it. I think it's helpful for her to share it because what she's going to be able to do is she's identified... Well, she's labelled the type of abuse that she's had as coercive control. It's a little bit less obvious, perhaps, than some of the other types of abuse that we all know, you can point to. So physical abuse is far more obvious. But this kind of insidious abuse that happens to so many women, and they really struggle to label it. So for someone like, J.K. Rowling to start listing some of the ways in which she was controlled, she isn't anymore, how she was controlled by her ex-husband, I think it's just useful. It's hard, because if you're reading this story, you go, oh, that's me, I had a similar experience.
And it kind of happens by stealth sometimes, doesn't it?
For sure, and I think it's very easy when you're on the outside to look into someone's relationship and go, oh, how did you tolerate that stuff? But having been that person myself and actually experienced abuse where it wasn't so obvious, where people did sort of control me in ways.
What did you experience?
So, for example, I was told there were certain types of music I wasn't allowed to listen to, or certain people I wasn't allowed to talk to. And those are patterns of abuse that you do hear quite often in stories of domestic violence and domestic abuse. And so I think it's hard when you are the person that's in it to kind of go, oh, wow, I didn't realise that was abuse.
But did you realise it at the time, or is it looking back on it now you realise?
It was when I made the documentary and I started to explain... So we were looking at the statistics around how disabled women are disproportionately impacted by... You're twice as likely, to be a victim of domestic abuse if you have a disability. We were looking at why that is. And I was the reporter and I was being asked about some of my personal experiences, and it was then I sort of went, oh, yeah, that sounds like abuse.
Yeah.
And that word's a big word. It's a big label. It carries a lot.
And do you think it's because you love this person so much that you put up with it?
I think that's why every single woman in this situation that J.K. Rowling was in, that's probably the reasons why.
Is it always just about love, though? Is it that simple? Isn't it about power shift, power play,
well, you hear about
fear,
financial control.
Yeah.
Somebody hasn't got anywhere to go. She speaks about it in this article on the podcast where she says, she was pregnant, she didn't have anywhere to go, she didn't have any money, she didn't have any way out.
You see, on that I'd like to pick up, because I think I've been lucky. I've never been abused, and either mentally or physically, so I'm lucky. And I think I had a certain innocence about that. I'm talking, of course, about back in the day. And I would have thought, because I'm spiky enough when I get going, and
no, we won't have it.
I imagine that I would have said, that's my manuscript, how dare you, or something, words to that effect. However, a bit like yourself, I did a documentary in Northern Ireland, I'm going back a few years, and it was the first refuge in Belfast. And if I'm being honest, I didn't really know how refuge worked and everything. So I said to these women, so why didn't you just leave? And just as you've said, they went, well, I had 3 or 4 children, I have no money. Yeah. But one woman sticks in my mind. She was covered in bruises. She took off her top and showed me. And I went, well, how can you put up with that? I mean, she was black and blue all over. She said, I actually went to my husband's mother. I said to her, look at this, all these bruises. This is what your son did to me. And she said, well, why should you be any different? Because his father's been abusing me for over 40 years. And that was the issue then. And thank goodness, things have really moved forward. And I know there still is a lot of abuse.
And the law now recognises coercive abuse as well. So, well, if you've been affected by anything that we've been talking about, there is help available on our website.